Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast exploring life-changing career moves. I'm your host, Brian Aquart. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the bold decisions that transform their careers and lives. Let's dive in. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. Today, we're diving deep into the world of leadership, corporate well-being, and the transformative power of mindfulness with Myrto Legaki. In an era where burnout and stress are all too common, she has not only faced these challenges head-on, but has turned them into a catalyst for change, both for herself and for the countless leaders and teams she now empowers. Get ready to explore how a journey through adversity led to a career dedicated to helping others unlock their own potential, all while maintaining balance and purpose. Let's go check it out. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Myrto Legaki, a leadership and corporate well-being consultant, global keynote speaker, and the founder of One Breath Mindfulness Center. With over 15 years of experience as a management consultant and marketing manager across New York, London, and Athens, Myrto has collaborated with some of the world's leading organizations, including Google, Microsoft, Novartis, and Roche. After overcoming burnout through the practice of mindfulness, she now dedicates her career to helping leaders and teams thrive by integrating neuroscience, psychology, and mindfulness into their daily lives. And now, Myrto's journey is also a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative potential of mindful leadership. So I'm excited that she's coming on. We're also thrilled to have her here to share those insights and experiences with the audience. So Myrto, welcome to Why I Left. How you doing today?
Thank you, Brian. It's so great to be here with you. I'm doing great.
Likewise. So this background, you have such a rich background. I was very excited that we got connected. You found me through a former guest, right? Which I'll give her a shout out a little bit later. But before we kind of get into some of your work, you've had this really extensive career as I mentioned, as a management consultant, marketing manager across a few different geographies. What pivotal experiences from these roles really shaped your understanding of leadership and corporate well-being?
So yeah, as you said, I had a long career before I started doing what I do now. And basically, one of I think the most pivotal experience was being diagnosed with burnout, and actually more specifically, something that was quite more traumatic. And let's say it was one moment in time that for me kind of changed everything. And that was when 14 years ago, I was 6 months pregnant with my son. I woke up one day and I realized that I had lost 100% on my hearing on one side. And that was also coupled with a lot of other physical issues that I had. I wasn't able to walk unassisted. I had issues with orientation, vertigo, and how to sort of communicate because that whole hearing system was affected. So for me, that was a wake-up call. It was one of the ways that burnout presented itself for me on a physical level, but also there were a lot of other issues on an emotional and cognitive level. And it was a wake-up call for me to start doing things differently. It was something that made me pause and look at the way I was handling challenges and stresses in my daily life and my daily work before as a leader that didn't work anymore. And I had to find other ways to manage that. So for me, that was a wake-up call. And it basically showed me that there is no way that we can be productive. There is no way that we can achieve our goals if we don't at the same time take care of our body and take care of our mental health. These are not two different things, and they're impossible to separate. And they both need to be very well taken care of if we want to not only survive, but also thrive. So I realized that in order to be a successful company, also a company needs to invest in the well-being of its people. So it's not about looking for performance, but it's also looking for performance that is sustainable by creating a more let's say, human-centric cultures within companies that respect physical and mental health of their employees, but also support their employees in order to thrive.
I love that. And there are so many consistent themes that that I'm noticing now in this landscape of work along these lines. Because there's always been like wellness programs, but not exactly funded the way they're funded now. So I like the way and like how you're approaching this, because I think, especially after what we've all been through over these past few years, that being more in touch with one's wellness is huge, not only personally, but also for the benefit of the company, the benefit of the team members that you work with. So I like that you're taking that approach. And one of the things I noticed in your journey, it's you've gone from finance, marketing. Now you've founded One Breath Mindfulness. Can you share some motivations behind these transitions and how your previous roles really influenced your current path?
I think the most important motivation for me is being of service. In a way, helping other people facing similar challenges in demanding work environments with ways to approach this stress and this, let's say, pressure in a more effective way. Because when I was in that position 15 years ago, actually more than 15 years ago, I was facing stress, but I was not equipped to handle it well. But we know now there's different ways to see things. We know that we have practices. We know that we have tools. We know that there's a great value into bringing our focus into how to support ourselves. But I didn't know these things, or even if I had heard of them, they were not top of mind. So the greatest motivation is to be of service and also to help create these human-centric workplaces that I didn't have, let's say, the chance to live back then, because that was like 24 years ago. I was in New York in 2000, way before September 11th. So, it was a different culture back then. Things were done differently in corporations back then. Thankfully, things have changed, especially after COVID. So what I want to do now is support other people, other professionals, other leaders, but also organizations into creating environments that help people thrive. So I think that's my main motivator, and then making an impact in doing so.
Oh, I love that. And I mentioned earlier, you've worked with some big companies. And I think it's a perfect segue you just mentioned around what you're trying to do with the companies that you kind of are of service to now. So how do you tailor your leadership and corporate well-being programs to meet the unique needs of these, diverse and often very high performing teams?
Exactly. So, as you said, they need to be tailored. A lot of times we see in this space of corporate well-being products that are kind of packaged. But in my experience, every company is very different. The culture of every company is very different. The people are different, and the demands and the needs are quite varying. So, what I try to do with my team is try to go into a company, understand the culture, make sure that we understand what are the key pain points, oftentimes also taking feedback from the people themselves. So it's not necessarily something, programs that are top down, but also bottom up. So we're taking feedback from employees, we're taking feedback from teams about what actually their needs are. And based on that, we can tailor our programs to meet these specific needs instead of creating packages or programs that are a little bit, generic. So one thing is that we tailor them. And the second is that we try to make them very specific and practical for these specific corporations. So, for example, if I'm working with a company that is very tech oriented and 80% of their staff or employees are engineers, they're stuck on a screen, they're coding all day long, or for example, they're working a lot by themselves, they're doing a lot of work by themselves. It's a very different program, a leadership program, or a very different training program that I'm going to develop to support them versus if it's a team that has a lot of outbound work, more collaboration, or if it's a sales team, or if it's a team that has to do with, let's say, call center operations or a lot of contact with the front line or customers on the front line. So depending on the type of work, depending on the function, depending on the needs of each team, we cater these programs to their needs. So it's not about a one-stop shop solution, but rather it's about finding what is ideal for each organization and each specific team.
I think that's so important too, because that cookie cutter approach often doesn't work in these types of situations, because different orgs have different cultures, like you mentioned, right? So that's really going to be key. And curious, the in for some of these places, who are you typically kind of interfacing with in order to get these services? And is it the HR person? Is it, because a lot of folks don't have like a well-being role, or orgs don't have like a well-being role. So who's like your in for some of these organizations to get this information out there?
Well, typically it would be HR directors. Sometimes it's even the CEOs. Many times I've been called directly from the CEO of a company that I've never worked before, and they would have heard of our work from word of mouth, and they would just call up and say, "Hey, I heard about the work that you're doing, and I want you for my team. We have a leadership team. My team is not performing well. We're not, gelling together. There's no empathy," or whatever the issue would be, and they would just call me directly. I have a lot of work that comes on like that. And then depending on the size of the organization, if they do not have a well-being specialist, which to be honest, not all companies have that, maybe larger ones, it might be someone from, let's say, organizational health, or it can even be someone from learning and development, because a lot of our programs also fall not necessarily under the well-being sector, but also under leadership and development. So it will be training and development or these kinds of contact people, but typically CHROs or CEOs, and then organizational
Oh, that
development.
makes a lot of sense. And so now you're often tapped to speak around these topics globally, right? And so you speak with audiences talking about leadership, as you mentioned, mental health and different diversity, right? What are some key messages you hope to impart to leaders in really this kind of fast-paced world that we're all living in?
I think the first one would be that we need to start understanding our mind better if we want to lead better. We are under the impression, especially if they're successful leaders, they would be under the impression that they're doing a lot of things right, not all things right, and that sort of they have it under control. But the truth is that most of us are not aware of what happens in our mind. And in that sense, there's not a lot of self-awareness. And in my opinion, and in my experience, there is no leadership without self-awareness, right? So we do not control our mind, and yet our mind controls us. In fact, scientists estimate that 45% of our time, our behavior at work, but also in our personal life, is driven by reactions that are below our conscious awareness. So we're reverting a lot of times to autopilot, to actions or reactions and behaviors that we're not necessarily aware of. And sometimes we just do it because that's what we've been doing all along, but we don't really realize what the impact of these actions are to other people, and that's external self-awareness. And we don't even understand why we're acting in this way, or why we're reacting in this way. So I think the most important thing here to understand, and what I'm trying also to impart, is that once we learn to understand our mind, we stop being led by it, and we start making more conscious decisions and being more, let's say, rounded leaders, rather than being, at the mercy of our impulses. So one thing would be self-awareness for sure. The other thing it's an issue that's really important to me, is what I talked about before, is about, I'm not going to say work-life balance, because I hate that sort of, the premise, because it's not work and life. We're not two different things. We're living one life. We're one person, one experience, and one chance to make an impact. So rather, I would say, how can we find ways to be more balanced, to be whole in this body, while we're trying to do all these things that we want to do? So how can we find purpose in what we're doing? And how can we find a way to support ourselves on a physical, mental, and emotional level, so that while we're pursuing that purpose, and while we're achieving these goals and this vision of the life that we want to lead through our work and through our personal life, be more whole, be healthy, and thrive and enjoy? Because another thing that I'm seeing, especially if I'm working with high stress environments or leaders that are really, A-type, strong performers, always doing, always focused on the results, which is great, is that we're losing touch with why we're doing this whole thing. And how can we also find time to enjoy, find pleasure, find joy, find the joy of sharing, find the joy of, making impact and touching people's lives. So it's about balance, well-being, but also joy and impact.
Oh, I love that. And I'm hearing a theme, an underlying theme with both of those really is around intentionality, especially the self-awareness piece, right? You need to intentionally almost kind of take a step back to recognize, kind of to your point, where you are in your body and mind in this space, right? And so I love that you mentioned that. And I'll be honest, I have your words really are sticking with me because there have been times where I too have been go, 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 hustle, 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 and not taking the time for myself, and have paid for that, right? So I appreciate you kind of mentioning that, and it's also, you talked about kind of this mental connection. It's another good segue because a lot of the work that you do, you integrate. And this is one of the things that fascinated me as I was kind of reading about your work and your background. You integrate like neuroscience, psychology, and mindfulness in this space. And so, how do these disciplines really intersect in your approach to leadership development? And what results have you seen from combining them? Because not a lot of folks may put those two together. I think more and more are starting to, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's a natural thing for folks to do right off the bat.
Well, actually, this is a combination that works, and that's why I use it, because it's very difficult to change behavior, because this is what we're looking for, right? In a training program, in any kind of development program, a leadership program, we're looking to change behavior, basically, right? So it's very difficult to change behavior just by focusing on the mind, right? Going in from the mind and trying to change our behavior, basically just with theory, right? If it were that easy, so everyone would just read a book or would attend a seminar, a webinar, and then they would just apply everything they heard, and nobody would would question that, and we'd all be happy, and everyone would be a top performer and would be collaborating perfectly, and everything would be great. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that, exactly because of our unconscious mind and the lack of self-awareness. So when we integrate the learnings from neuroscience and we couple them with psychology together with mindfulness practice, we can actually create changes in the way our brain works. Let's say, for example, I might have a project with a leadership team that is looking to enhance collaboration and team cohesion and, really bring the we into the team, right? Let's say it's missing that part. We could do a bunch of exercises and teamwork, but what I really found hits the spot is when neuroscience comes in and it gives insight into team dynamics and collaboration, because we'll look into how the mind works and how the brain processes social interactions and trust and communication. We'll talk about the different areas of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, which regulates all these decisions that we're making and problem solving. And we'll talk about the other parts of the brain, like the limbic system, which drives emotional responses. And if we feel like we're threatened in a team, it always happens in a leadership team, then we kind of go into the defense, we go into fight or flight. And how does that show up for me? And so when we understand what is going on in the background, let's say when we open the hood and look behind in our brain, and we understand how the nervous system works, then it makes everything more clear, because it's not just this unconscious behavior that I'm into and I don't know why it's happening or where does it come from. Suddenly becomes more clear. I understand where I'm coming from. I have more self-awareness, and then I can take these cues from my body and my behavior and see how I can turn it around to bring it into where I want to be. So typically, if I bring in neuroscience, it helps to also answer the why that some leaders have, like convince me why should I do what you're telling me to do? So when I bring it down with science into the practicalities of how the mind works, and then give you practical ways to change the way this wiring is in our brain with psychology and with these mindfulness practices, then the outcome is more believable and also more practical and more, let's say, feasible for someone to understand and also practice. So it's this coupling of understanding our wiring that affects our psychology and then our behavior, coupled with the tools to change all that brings ultimately great results.
No, that's awesome. And I could only imagine that probably half your battle in the beginning is probably convincing people that this is the route that they should be thinking about, right? Because you're probably dealing with a lot of folks don't have a lot of time on their hands. And so when you're speaking about this, almost taking a step back, taking a pause, being a bit more intentional, being a bit more self-reflective, I'm sure you may get a few naysayers in the beginning. So I love the way that you handle that with the data and the statistics. So that's great. Now you started talking a little bit earlier around your own burnout experience, right? And it is obviously a significant issue in high demand careers, but truthfully, as we're seeing just overall in work life in general. And so, can you walk us through a little more in depth of your own experience with burnout and how mindfulness then played a role in your own recovery and your own career evolution?
Yeah, well, it happened, very slowly and then suddenly, like a lot of these things when it has to do with chronic stress. So it had been building up for 15 years. So living under constant stress, but having absolutely no awareness of it in my body. That's why I go back into saying how important it is to have self awareness. So it was year after year of, amassing one problem after the other, one sort of little ailment here, one ailment there, problems with my breathing or, skin problems or, in my digestion problems. And I would just ignore them because everybody, then the doctors would say it was just stress. So just stress. And then I would just ignore it and keep on going, doing what I wanted to do, keep on pursuing more goals. So it had a lot to do with ignoring the signs of stress and ignoring the signs of my body. Unfortunately, the body never lies. It keeps the score, like this wonderful book by Bessel van der Kolk. So the body keeps the score and it never lies. So after 15 years, it kind of blew up and it said no more. And this is what led to me losing my hearing and actually diagnosed with an autoimmune disease at the same time. So that's how I came to realize that something needed to change. So what I did is looked for support. So I turned into professionals to the mental health space to find support into how to overcome, first of all, this handicap, because it was a handicap, and also how to start changing my relationship with stress that tended to sort of leave me in a feeling of hopelessness, like I was under the stress and not being able to take a breath. So first is taking help, seeking help from professionals. And then while I was in that process, I really felt that there was something else that I needed to look at. And I had been reading about mindfulness and its benefits for years and years, but I never sort of had taken the chance on it. So at that point, I said, I've tried everything else. I might as well try that. So I started practicing for 5 minutes every day for 30 days. That was my goal, to practice for 5 minutes every day for 30 days. And that's what I did. And that eventually basically changed my life. I know now that by practicing these 5 minutes of pause and conscious breathing every day, I started rewiring my brain, which had been completely burnt out. I started working more and functioning more with the prefrontal cortex, so the front part of my brain that kind of said, it's okay. It's a stressful situation, but it's okay. You can take a step back. You're not going to die from this. You can relax. You feel safe. And that was done through this simple practice of breathing. And that in turn changed my entire outlook on stress and life in that sense. So I learned to take that step back just by focusing on my breathing for a few minutes a day. And after doing that for months and months, I can say easily that I was completely transformed, to be honest. So it's not that I don't experience stress. Obviously, I do. But the relationship with stress is quite different now. It's not something out there that is to get me and I'm kind of feeling lost under it, but it's something that I can understand, something that I can translate into physical sensations, and I can very, very specifically pinpoint them when they rise up, and something that I can manage because I now have tools in order to regulate my nervous system.
That makes a lot of sense. And that mindfulness piece being at the core of your leadership programs, I think it resonates with a lot of folks. But as we had mentioned earlier, there are likely individuals when you introduce a concept like this, there may be some skepticism. And so, what impact does it have on your ability to lead effectively, and how do you really get it across to them that this is something, to your point, that you need to take a step back and actually do? So, how do you do that?
Well, first of all, I never go into a program saying that this was the only thing that we're going to do. So if there is any skepticism, it's not out there. So first of all, I use science. We have so much science behind that. We have more than 7,000 published scientific studies that show how the simple act of consciously breathing can really rewire our brain and help us be better leaders. We have science that says that mindfulness practice can decrease stress by 30% and increase productivity by 20%. We have fMRIs that show that how neuroplasticity has the ability to change our mind depending on how we practice. So one thing is that, and the other thing, if there's a lot of skepticism, I sometimes bring into the conversation the examples of other successful CEOs or leaders that really have taken up this practice to excel. And together with these CEOs, I also sometimes bring up, super athletes. Kobe Bryant used to be a great proponent of mindfulness. Novak Djokovic just talks about it all the time. We have entire NBA teams that practice mindfulness in order to center themselves, and then we have all these famous CEOs. So it's no secret that it helps with performance. So then what I typically try to do is say, and even now, nobody should believe me. You should actually just try it. So it's not about believing me or even believing the research. It's about, are you brave enough? Do you want to change hard enough so that you can take that little test, make that little experiment and see if it works for you? So I think is a good leeway, because I'm not asking for, anyone to believe in any theory. We're just asking to see it work. And to be honest, I'm sure if you've tried it for a few times, you might even have seen it. If you just close your eyes and breathe consciously for 5 minutes, chances are that you will feel better. Chances are that when you open your eyes, you will be more focused, you will be calmer, you will be able to see things more clearly. So it's not about believing in any theory. It's about actually seeing it work on your body, on your psychology, and on your cognitive capabilities.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I'm a huge proponent of that as well. I mean, I probably do breath work at least once or twice a day, especially in the morning. It kind of helps just to get me prepared for the day, right? And do everything. And at night, obviously,
Exactly.
it's just very relaxing. So I'm a huge fan and huge proponent of it as well. And so piggybacking off of that, let's say you did have someone who was skeptical, but then you were able to kind of flip them because they were intentional and they just tried it, to your point, right? So can you maybe share a specific example of how mindfulness has helped a leader or maybe even a team that you've worked with to unlock their own potential while maintaining this much better integration between kind of professional, personal life?
Absolutely. And it's not just one example. Perhaps I'll give you a couple as they come to mind. So a couple of years ago, I was asked to work with actually not asked to work. He called me personally and asked to work together because he had just taken on that role. He was a CEO of a multinational, one of the largest technology companies in the world. And he had just taken on the role. And under the pressure of that new role, he had started let's say, facing some symptoms in his body with vertigo and tinnitus and things like that. So he knew that something was wrong, and he knew there was no biological, nothing wrong on the medical side of it. He had gone through all the tests that needed to be done. So there was nothing, let's say, that was actually wrong, that the doctors would say, okay, you need to fix this, you need to take this drug. I guess it boiled down to, the way he was handling stress. So we worked together to change his perception of stress, because we know that stress is something that is really relative. The most important definition about stress has to do with the perception that an individual has about his or her ability to handle the challenges of life. So it's about whether we believe that we have the resources, the capacity, the strategies, or the strengths to respond to the challenges of our work and our life. So if we believe that we have it, then we do not experience stress. So it's really relative. So it had to do with changing his perspective towards the stress that he was experiencing, and then coupling that with specific exercises to downregulate the nervous system, which was obviously because of that intense pressure, it was very activated. So when the nervous system is really activated, it's very hard to change it through the mind, is like I said. So what we do is we use our physiology to change our psychology. So I will have someone work with their physiology to reduce their stress level and downregulate the nervous system. And from that place of more calm, be able to take a step back and see the exact same challenges with the different eyes, and seeing them as more manageable, seeing them as something that they can work with. So that was one example. And actually, what happened afterwards is, and usually that's what happens when people start practicing, and especially skeptical leaders, and especially male leaders, because they're the most
Oh,
skeptical.
I can
But
imagine.
if you prove, yeah, if they find that this works, and then I remember at some point he turned around and said, listen, after I think a couple of months, he said, listen, this is not just about managing stress. This basically changed my whole leadership style. This basically changed everything, because now I see things clearly. Now I have more insight. I have more self-awareness. And if I have more self-awareness, I realize that I'm more empathetic with my team as well. I realize that I'm not impersonal. I realize that I bring in more my human side of it, and that I'm managing my team more effectively. And typically what happens is, because I'd work with an executive assistant, or they would handle their calendar or something like that. And so we'd be liaising a lot. So typically executive assistants, or their personal, so the people that work closest with these people, these CEOs, would be the ones that are the greatest proponent of these programs that I run, because they see how their bosses have changed through this practice, and they see how much better work gets done,
Yes.
and how much happier their teams are. And there's another example, and it blew my mind. I think at some point I was teaching a leadership workshop that was about resilience with a very large bank. And banks can sometimes be organizations that, might be a little bit square in the way they see things. And this was, a team of senior executives, like really into the technicalities of the bank, like risk and all these kinds of things, a lot of technical minds in there. So I walk into the room and everybody was standing like this with their arms like this, really body language saying no. So I'm standing there, I'm like, okay, this is going to be a good one. So we start talking about resilience. We start talking about self-awareness. We start talking about the neuroscience of it. And obviously then we do some practice, because we always bring in the practice. And then after we finished the practice, there was, a sharing circle. We talk about, how everybody experienced that. And one executive, who was the one that was most quiet, and the one who seemed to be less engaged, as in, I don't need this. It's not going to work for me. And he raises his hand and he shares, this is the first time that I realize I have a body in my life. He was 50 years old. And this is the first time I realize I'm breathing. And actually, this is the first time I'm realizing that my colleagues are also human, and not just transactions, not just a business transaction. I need something from you. You need something from me. We need to work together to get something done, transactional leadership. So I think this stuck with me,
Well, that's huge, especially first, to have come to that realization at that stage in your life is a huge step. Two, to verbalize that in an open forum with your peers and you, right? And who you just mentioned, I'm looking at these folks as just transactions. That's pretty powerful. That's pretty powerful. So thank you for sharing that, because I think more people need to hear that. And I'm curious, did work ever continue with that organization where you could kind of see some of their growth, or was it like a limited engagement?
Oh, absolutely. To be honest, 90% of the work I do with organizations is repeat work. So we tend to build long-term relationships, and we have a lot of repeat business, because we just build this trust, and just really making an impact are at the core of what I do. So we do a lot of work with most of my clients, and then I get deeper under their skin also as our collaboration goes along, because it looks like it's working. And also what I see happening is that once an organization invests in these kinds of trainings and these kinds of approaches that cultivate self-awareness and empathy and emotional intelligence, what happens is that the language of the organization change. And in the end, they end up being culture transformations that are happening through the teams themselves. So we're developing a common vocabulary. We're developing common ways of doing things. For example, I was running a very large project, training thousands of employees, again, for a bank. And what happened is then the teams that were participating in these trainings started bringing the practices in their own teams, even though not everybody had participated in the same training. So they would open up their meetings with, a few minutes of mindfulness practice, or they would start applying some of the practices that cultivate emotional intelligence in the middle of, let's say, a conflict at work. Or they would start applying, if they were leaders, some of the tips and the strategies to maintain balance and create boundaries so that we can have a healthier relationship with our work. Or other teams would say, how can we apply this when we're making the plans for next year and we're deciding which projects to work on and what to put on the pipeline? And are we asking too much of ourselves if we're going to do all of these things? Should we cut back on something in order to preserve our team's emotional health, mental health, and physical health? So it happens bottom up, which is the best way actually to run a culture transformation project. So that's why I think we also have a lot of, continuous relationships with our clients, because we see that change also comes from the organization itself, rather than it being something that is decided from an HR or a CEO and then being trickled down, but not everybody buying in on it.
I like that a lot. And what I love kind of hearing in that shift from an organizational standpoint is that business decisions are being made on its potential impact on the team member well-being, right, and wellness. And that's huge, right? And so I think oftentimes, to the gentleman's point earlier, it's always typically about transactions and doing something and doing that. And so to bring that humanity back into that space, I think is huge. And so kudos to you for having that impact, because I love to hear that. Would love to kind of now shift a little bit into really some advice, right? This section of the show gets a lot of good traction because, people who often listen to my show are really kind of looking for, practical steps for fill in the blank thing that they're facing. So for folks who may be currently facing burnout or stress in their careers, what are some practical steps they can take today to begin their journey towards recovery and, I'll say, like, balance and or integration, better integration?
Yeah, I think I'm focused on the prevention side of it, because if you're already facing burnout, I think it's a whole different discussion, and you need to be, very, very specific about the type of help that you're gonna look for yourself. And we're talking about also depending on how, because burnout is a syndrome that is, let's say, it shows up in many different ways. So let's focus on prevention, right? So what I would say, if someone is facing a lot of stress in their work environment, first of all, it would be understand stress. So spend some time, educate yourself about stress and what it is. What is the physiology of stress? What is the biology of stress? How does it show up in your body? And what does it do to you? So first is education, right? Because when we know what stress is, then we can handle it better. It's not this dark cloud over our heads that we can't get out of. So education. And then the second thing would be take radical responsibility. So nobody's going to come and save you. If you're facing stress, you need to take care of yourself first. Then we can talk about what other things you can do in your environment. But first of all, take responsibility for it. Be the one that is going to be your advocate and take responsibility for your health. The third thing would be accepting and befriending the idea that stress is always going to be there. So stress is not necessarily a bad thing. It's something that happens all the time. We actually need it. But if you accept that it's going to be there, then you're more prepared to manage it. Don't expect that there will sometime be a point in your life, or, some months or years in your life, that there will not be stress. There will always be stress. So accept that and work with how you can be able to change your relationship with it. And then I would say, really invest in some practices that you can do day in and day out that support not only your physical health, but your mental health. And I will not say that it's just mindfulness or breath work. It could be physical exercise, moving your body every day, practicing some other kind of mind body sort of practice like yoga or Tai Chi or something of the kind, even Pilates, if you do it like in a more conscious way, something that connects your body with your mind and your breath, something that helps you get grounded in your body and move your body in a healthy way. Because that is something that we know is creates all these hormones that counteract the hormones of stress. So we need that, absolutely need that. And then the final thing would be, learning to say no, which is something that I learned much, much later. So basically, it's just boundaries, healthy boundaries, not taking on more than you can handle, really, really before committing into something, sitting down and looking at your calendar, looking at your deliverables and making sure that you can take that on, and really taking an inventory of all the things that you do and whether they deplete or they nourish you, and taking out or eliminating everything that, if you can, to the point that you can, that is draining you, so that you're not only left, with, I sometimes call it an energy budget, with a budget that is depleted, but that you find also things that also bring some joy into your life, bring some energy into your life and into your day, so that you're not depleted at the end of the day, but you have something, something that nourishes you every day. And it's not just one thing, it's a lot of things. And we need to do everything actually to be balanced, not just one thing, unfortunately.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And that's great words of wisdom. Now let's kind of shift a little bit to leaders, right? So what advice would you give to leaders who want to create this more human-centric culture in their organization, but they really don't know where to start?
One great shift would be to be the leader you wish you had when you were in their position. So at some point you were an individual contributor before you got promoted, before you had a team to manage, and you had someone or some people that were managing you. What would you like them to have done in order to respect you, in order to have a more balanced life, in order to work in a way that was more supportive on every level? So perhaps visualize and remember, what you would like a leader to be like, and then start applying that. And the other would be developing more self-awareness, in the sense that what you need from work is typically what your team will also need. If you are not feeling well, they will not be feeling well. And your mental health and your stress levels are going to affect the stress levels of your team. Actually, this is very well documented. And we know that the mental health, one of the greatest factors affecting mental health of workers, is the mental health condition and the stress levels of their manager, because it's one of the most important relationships in our life. We spend more than half of our time with our managers, whether we work in the same office or hybrid or remote. It's still one of the most important relationships that we have in our life. So own that responsibility, and own the fact that your decisions and your mental health are affecting the ones of your team. The third is listen more. So ask for more feedback. Start noticing, what is your team telling you? What are the cues? What are the verbal and nonverbal cues? What happens if you look at the project plan, or if you look down the pipeline, and what happens to their faces? Is everyone feeling down when you're talking about what needs to be done? Is there enthusiasm? Is there engagement? And then ask for their feedback. How are we doing? How are you doing? And spend time to get to know them as people, so then you can read their cues and really know if they're doing well or not. So this is one of the greatest responsibilities as a leader. So if you're leading, someone has to follow. So ask yourself, why should anyone follow me? If you're not protecting them, if they're not trusting you, if you're not supporting them, if you're not creating an environment for them to thrive, they will not follow. So ask for feedback, notice their reactions, know them as human beings, and provide what the environment that they need to thrive.
I love that. And that really sits well with me too. I think about some of my earlier experiences, right? And having that intention of, well, how would I have wanted to be treated at that point in my career, I think is very pointed advice for those who may not know where to start. Now, looking forward for you, what type of impact are you hoping to have in the future? What's next for Myrto?
To be honest, I love the work that I'm doing with women leadership. So this is something that is a new sort of new. I mean, a couple of years that we're working on it. So it's really exciting for me as a woman leader, as a leader that I've spent most of my career being the only woman in a room. It's I know the challenges behind it, and I can see it when I'm working with leaders, with women leaders, how thirsty we are to connect, how thirsty we are to find more tools and empowerment and support in order to achieve more. So this is something that's really exciting for me, and I hope to do more and more of that work, and also touch more and more people with keynote speeches and presentations, which is it's just something that I love doing, and I hope to be doing more of that in the future.
Oh, that's awesome. And now let's flip the mic a little bit. What is one question that you have for me that I could potentially answer? Hopefully, I can answer it.
I'd like to know what you do to support yourself, to have more balance and to support your mental health and your well-being. What practical things that you do every day that really help you? Because I'm sure you're also stressed. I'm sure you do a lot of things, and you try to do, be the best that you can be in everything that you take on. So how do you support yourself?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So, I have I'm a big proponent of meditation and mindfulness and things like that. And I've always kind of not always, but I've been into it for some time, like probably since high school, college, but I don't think I really it was more on occasion than an actual practice. However, during COVID, obviously we have so much time on our hands during that time. And I'm a part of the Peloton app. I'm in, Peloton life for me. And I started doing guided meditations throughout the pandemic. And they've been great. I've done sleep meditations, I've done energizing meditations, and there are like key practitioners on there who I've just gotten really comfortable with in how they walk you through fill in the blank topic of the day. And so that happened over the pandemic, and I have since continued that. At times, like some of the breath work that I've done, I could do that by myself and really focus. But what I love about the whole and keyword practice of meditation is that my mind still wanders, right? Even though I've been doing this for a long time, like my mind still wanders. So to really sit back and try to be intentional as often, I try to do it every day, but it's really probably three to four times a week, that the meditation piece really helps me out. And I give that example. Don't get me wrong, I'm doing a lot of physical activity as well, right? So with the running and the lifting and all those things, and I talk about that often, but I think I often don't talk a little bit about some of the meditation work that I do. And so I'm a huge fan of that. And guided meditations have been really, really key for me. If I've been stressed and I've wanted to do, and I may have trouble sleeping, I'll do a sleep meditation, and it's good when you don't know when it ends, and you just you just kind of wake up the next day like, oh, headphones still on and everything, right? Um, but
Yeah.
that's what I do for myself. Given the topic, what we're talking about today, that meditation piece, that mindfulness piece, is something that I'm truthfully continuing to work on. And what's great about it is that you never really like conquer it, right? It's always something because life is happening. It's just you coming back to, it's like coming back to basics every time, because each day brings new stressors and don't get me wrong, new good things as well, but potentially, little downers on occasion. And so how do you come back to self? I found that way has been a consistently positive way for me to do that. So great question. Great question. Well, look, Myrto, this was a great conversation. I love the work that you're doing. Your overall vibe. I'm sure you get that a lot, right? Just like, I could just kind of feel it through the screen here.
I'm very passionate about what I
Yes,
do, to be
yes,
honest.
and you
Yeah,
can tell.
yeah,
That's the thing.
lots
Like you
of
can
that.
really tell when someone is really
Yeah,
living their work, and I really see that
yeah,
in you. And so I'm glad you found me. Let's give a shout out to Zoe Fragu, right? Who you actually saw
yeah.
our interview, reached out to me, and I'm really glad we connected. And her and I had a great conversation as well. So would love for you to share where our listeners can find you and support some of the work that you're doing.
Well, I post regularly on LinkedIn about these subjects that I love talking about. So core leadership skills and well-being and mindfulness, neuroscience, women leadership, and all in all balance and purpose. So I post really regularly. So I really encourage everyone that's listening to connect. I'd love to get to know you. And then there's a YouTube channel, which I will start uploading more and more of the work there. And also the website, which is myrtolegaki.com.
Well, thank you for that. And look, and that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank Myrto Legaki for joining me today. I'll share all of her information in our show notes. And I hope you all have a great week. Take some time for yourself. Take some, mindfulness for yourself and really start connecting with who you are. And I think those are some key themes that we picked up today. So again, have a great week and we'll see you next time. Myrto, thank you. Thanks for listening to Why I Left. Join us next time for more inspiring stories about growth, resilience, and transformation. Visit us online at www.whyiLeft.co. That's whyiLeft.co. And subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the Alive Podcast Network. See you soon.